Yeah, my name is Eric. I go by he, him pronouns, and I am identify as bi, and I am married to my wife, and we have a heteronormative relationship. I'm also white passing. No, it doesn't look like it, but I'm also half Filipino, and that does play a big part of who I am. And I work at Pacific Beach United Methodist as a youth ministries coordinator. And some of my passions is taking hikes with my dog. I just got a dog this pandemic, as probably many other people have. And I like to cook, bake, play the piano, knit, various things. Toxic masculinity for me is like behaviors or ideologies that are harmful to not just men, but also women and children. And it's just these these subconscious actions that we don't really realize that could be toxic to everybody, and that leads into like misogyny or like homophobia, and that feels like there's some sort of superiority of ourselves or of men. So that's how I look at toxic masculinity.
Sense of superiority. How does that work itself out?
I think some examples, as in like we look at our daily work lives where we have men always having these positions of power, and just being able to like go into an interview and BS the way through and have that confidence without having that experience to back up what they're saying. Those are kind of those things that like kind of play into this confidence that like men have, or this reliance on I think just reliance that like we know we have this confidence to get us further, and so we use that to our advantage. Men use that to their advantage.
Mhm. What is it that makes it toxic, and to whom is being poisoned, harmed by this toxicity?
Right. So I think when toxic masculinity is being um, portrayed, it's usually against people who usually women, or those who don't define themselves as the societal norm of what men should be. Um, I don't really, as I think, I don't really subscribe to toxic masculinity, and sometimes I also have to double check where I am at, because sometimes it does creep in into all of our lives when we um, not notice it. And then I'm thankful to have my wife who will call out some stuff that could be a little misogynistic or sexist at times. And then there's that power play where I could decide whether or not to double down on what I said or like acknowledge that this is an issue. And so it's usually against people, usually women, and those who don't identify normal with the normal male standards.
I think in my experience, it also can be something, especially the pressure for conformity, and I think that's probably one of the core issues to that, the toxicity as it hits boys and non-gender specifying people. The requirement, just the assumption that there are boys and girls and there are differences and you must adhere to one. There's When I was growing up, in some ways it was okay to be a tomboy, to be a girl who was more masculine presenting, but it was not okay to be a sissy boy, to be a boy who
Yes.
was not masculine presenting or who was feminine presenting. And there seemed, and maybe this is a little bit jealousy on my part when I was growing up, there seemed to be a little more freedom for women to be able to choose. Now, certainly there's a lot of misogyny that comes with it, and not
Yeah.
having been in that place, I wouldn't have experienced it the same way. But it when the name calling that went on and still goes on among young people. Certainly sexual orientation comes into play. And if one is exploring who one is drawn to, who one identifies with, the real toxicity as it comes out in this sense, the oppression that is there, is more towards a belittling of women and of anyone who would appear to be like that. The only thing that is valued is this very traditional form of masculinity. One of the things that I try to do in this series is to draw in matters of faith to it. And this is one of those places we have this great history of really struggling with sexuality and orientation and understanding what that means. And even to the crime of sodomy that, goes back to that biblical story there, where the angels are going to visit Sodom, and Lot takes them in to hide them, and the men from the town come and knock at the door and want to rape them, want to take them. And effectively, it isn't in any way, shape, or form about homosexuality. That's just, it is same-sex behavior. But what they're trying to do there is to demasculize, to turn these men into women, to control them in that way, because masculinity is so valued that it turns back in on, we're going to take away that which is valued in you.
Back in grade school, men were supposed to like stand a certain way or like look at things a certain way. So there's this thing going around during school where like we test if you're a man or if you're a little bit gay or queer by just like how you look at your fingernails. Like if you look at your fingernails like this or like that, or just like looking at the bottom of your shoe, it's this like minor things that you don't notice when you're a child that like society has instilled into our youth and our just society in general, that these are like ways to figure out if you're a man or not and how to like conform within those roles. So yeah, I think nowadays, like I try to work with how I perceive myself, whether it's whether I'm more masculine or more feminine, it's like besides the point to me, versus like, how do I want to do what makes me happy kind of thing. And sometimes I do appear more feminine, or I appear more masculine, or I just appear as Eric. And I think nowadays society still has an issue with toxic masculinity and how it plays into conformity. But also, I think at the same time, I think we're trying to change that narrative that it's okay for men to have feelings and emotions. And it's okay to not, it's okay to break down because men tend to have to not have feelings and not show emotion. And that was a sign of weakness. So, like, when I was younger, we were told to like toughen up, because men don't cry.
Right. Oh, that's one of the classics of toxic masculinity is withholding of emotion. That the only kind of emotion that is there is anger and hatred that is accessible for a man. And is this simply a movement to try to emasculate men, to say that anything that is masculine is bad? Can you see, what are some differences between, I'm not talking about difference between men and women, but differences between masculine and feminine. And I want to be clear that to me, there's a difference there. What are some things that are markers of masculinity that might not necessarily be toxic in and of themselves?
I think that's a very good question that we could explore because it's very hard to like pinpoint what defines masculinity
Hmm.
versus just our gender and sex. Um, because to me, what pops up as masculinity or being masculine is just like appearing to be a man. Your broad shoulders, your muscles, and all that, or like a short haircut, um, all that stuff. And I think it's hard when I think the media portrays men to be like brave, having attributes like that, what that could be masculine or feminine. I think it's a very good question to explore on what it truly means to be masculine or feminine in a male dominated society.
As much as we try, it tends to be tied in with some physical attributes. And I know now we're bringing in issues of non-binary
Mm-hmm.
and transgender, but it's a struggle trying to find the right language. I think we classically think of something that is feminine as being nurturing, coming out
Right.
of the fact that babies are nurtured in a body that we say is a woman's body. So it is feminine to at least nurture that baby while it's inside and breastfeeding. So there are things that biologically can happen. At the same time, I'm somebody who, with my kids, nurtured and wore my kids when we were having a vacation Bible school at church. I would just, because I had them during the day and I would carry them around with me. Uh, uh, my wife expressed the breast milk, and sometimes she'd be up pumping and I'd be up feeding the baby in the middle of the night. It was great. Sometimes she got to sleep longer, and sometimes I got to sleep longer. So we shared those responsibilities there. So I was nurturing, but there is, there seems to be sometimes that biological response that's there. And I know raising my kids now that there are times when, and maybe it's because of the way we've been socialized, or maybe I've unknowingly socialized them, when they're hurting, it's mom they want to go to
Right.
find that care there. That doesn't mean they don't come to me ever with if mom's not around, but there are some of these things that we see that are tied somewhat to biology and at least tradition. While the woman is nurturing the child, the male is out hunting and gathering for the food and bringing it in, and so there would be more aggression that would be part of that. Some of this that we call masculine and feminine is way tied back. Now, we aren't living in caves anymore, right? Or is there a masculinity that again is available to anyone to be valued? Are there things that are more traditionally feminine, or do we just need to toss that language out whatsoever?
I think, in my opinion, I think we should just like throw those terms out only because like they're confining to who we are and like who we want to be and like puts us in a box. But I think, well, in the household between my wife and I, we don't have typical gender roles that people would perceive as masculine or feminine. I am the I am the house cleaner. Like I clean the house. I do the kitchen. I do the chores around the house because I'm just better than her at cleaning the house because that's how I raised with my Filipino mom, being very tedious and with how we and detailed with how we clean the house. So I was raised with those abilities that I increased over the years. Whereas I'm like it appears to be more masculine to be in charge of money, but I have like no clue how to like balance a budget or like do all that stuff. So my wife, she is the one that like balances the budget and like making sure that we have our bills paid and all that stuff, which generally is typically the husband's job. Um, More so like we definitely don't follow those gender norms, and I think we just do what we do, what we're best at. Um, but I will like you mentioned that you mentioned something along the lines like women can endure more. And then there are times where being outspoken, I feel like that is also can be attributed more to a male quality because we always want to be heard and we always are the ones to be talked first and talk over people as well.
Mm.
But it is times where this probably plays more in I have an authority issue being raised um, in a military family that we don't speak against authority kind of thing. But my wife, she will tell anyone what's on her mind, even if um, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's our closest friends, even if it's um, someone at church. She will let people know what's on her mind and whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing. Whereas I kind of step back and be more introspective on what's going on. Um, and so that's kind of the thing that she has more. She's more brave, I should say, in encountering people with her opinion versus I'd rather not speak up kind of thing. And I know that's bad to say because I'm like an advocate of using your voice, especially when the Holy Spirit calls you. Um, those are some of the qualities that like I think appear more masculine, whether we do the house chores or balance the budget. But overall, I think we should just like throw those terms out because they just really limit us of who we need to be.
Mm-hmm. You have worked out for yourselves what the roles will be, and it's based on your background, your experience, your interests, your abilities. It is your choice how you engage in this. Looking at the issue of toxic masculinity is not trying to say you're bad or you're right, but rather to look and to say how are systems defining us? How are we locked into, and how does this kind of bullying, this kind of requiring conformity, how is it harmful? And not in a matter of, well, we probably would want to get rid of the bullying, we would want to get rid of the requiring conformity, but rather allowing people to recognize what works for them.
Yeah, and I think with that, we tend to view toxic masculinity as like something that is harmful, and that harmful also mean it has to be bad. Um, but when we look at those characteristics of toxic masculinity and we go deeper, sometimes talking over someone isn't can be toxic masculinity depending on how it's being done. But that's not. I don't feel like that's necessarily bad. I want to equate that to be bad depending on the situation. So I think when we really look deeper into and take account of all the variables of what's happening, um, it helps us easier to define whether or not it is toxic masculinity, whether in a way that you feel like you have power over another person. And I think that's where we need to like look into is where the power struggle of toxic masculinity. Um, yeah.
So what I hear you saying is that it's not just looking at the one issue, bullying or talking over. That's something to be addressed. But what we're talking about toxic masculinity is looking more broadly and having this as a handle on understanding why things are happening like this, so we can move. Having an understanding of toxic masculinity is like having that understanding of where people are coming from, what their experience has been, to help to say, how can we break out of that? How can we provide a setting where people are able to be valued and to be heard? I lift this up because as I was studying getting ready for this article popped right up into my news feed, and it's talking about our current situation with the president for the next few days, and I love the illustration that is there. You actually seen things like this, but it's not just our president and other political leaders that we can see the way that we force our own sense of what, for instance, masculinity is upon them. You see, I don't know if you've seen, I didn't pull one up here, but you see pictures, sometimes depictions of Jesus almost like a Rambo, coming out there, with guns blazing. And we are putting back onto matters of faith in this case, this very binding and boxing and saying, this is what is valued, this is what is important. And people are oftentimes really uncomfortable when they're confronted with who Jesus, really was. I was thinking this week with some of the violence that had gone on the previous week, that when Jesus was in the garden and the soldiers appeared, in one story, when telling of this, the sword is pulled out and the ear is cut off, and Jesus says, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Jesus says that the meek will inherit the earth. And we are, in our toxic masculine culture, want to reject that Jesus, instead of being challenged by the fact that Jesus was someone who, while yes, he had his moment of anger and turning over the tables, and was certainly speaking, while he did not practice violence, some people certainly experienced his challenge as being violent. Certainly the demons did when they were, cast into that herd of pigs and they jumped off the cliff. So it's not that there wasn't confrontation. It wasn't that there wasn't strength, but that within Jesus, it was always what is needed at this moment. And Jesus met us where we are and wanted us to be freed, it seems to me, of having to be locked into the roles that we have there. Is leading us in a different way that is uncomfortable for those whose God is violence, whose Lord is the power of the gun. And I think that personally that we have in this day a great example for us in someone who broke the stereotypes, who broke the norms. And I'm looking for that time of being able to reconnect with that.
It's good when we model ourselves after Jesus, because to me, Jesus is this person who like defies societal norms over and over again. And also to realize that you mentioned this like angry God, that like even God changes throughout the Bible from like being this angry God who like just completely obliterates mankind or humankind to a God in the New Testament that like you're able to have a conversation with and have God listen. These are like those skills that like we also have to listen to what's going on around us and within us to understand how we could change and grow out of toxic masculinity. And when we're confronted, that those moments that when we're confronted after we show toxic masculinity or any form of isms, we need to respond with, and we need to acknowledge, we need to adapt, and we need to change behaviors. And I think it's not only our job as men living in the society to create healthier standards for everyone. And I think it's also our responsibility as Christians to call out that. 2 weeks ago, I gave a sermon on the baptism of Jesus, and I had us go through our baptismal vows, and that we are committed every single day, not just when we get baptism, to renounce all this evilness and then to confront it. So I think it's also our responsibility as church people and leaders within our church to also to not only defy those norms, but also to challenge them and call them out. And I think when we do that, those are holy moments. Those are moments where we could connect with the Holy Spirit and bring the kingdom of heaven closer to us. And I truly believe when we confront and we deal with those issues and we move forward in a healthy way, that's when the kingdom of heaven is here, slowly but surely. And we are making strides each time we confront them. Because I think we're all called to make sure our world is a reflection of how we see Jesus and how we see the kingdom. So I think long-term goal is just to continue doing just that, and letting our youth know that it is okay to not be overly masculine. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to be feminine. And I think I have to live into those as well to set an example.